Welcome back, everyone, to another ASMR video. And today we have another extreme sleep series video. We have the God of War 20th anniversary retrospective continuation. And this is the Norse saga of games that came out. So, let's get into it here. Ford. It was an absolute honor to be a part of the team responsible for creating something like God of War. Every game was a wonderfully painful experience. Throughout the frantic multi-year marathons of each game, we all, as a team, experienced some incredible highs and painfully difficult lows. I have no illusions that these games would have been possible without the incredible teams made up of hundreds of brilliant human beings. They are the reason the God of War games ever got made. It is these humans who made them play great, look amazing, sound fantastic, and make you feel something while experiencing them. This franchise of games, all games really, would not be possible without developers. This industry runs on the blood, sweat, and creative ephemera of people who are driven to make things. There are no games without the people who make them. All the people who make them. Thank you to all the people who helped make the God of War games. I am forever in awe of what you have accomplished. You should be proud. These are your games. Thank you to all the developers the industry over. The experiences you create bring me so much joy and make each day just a little bit more manageable. And a massive thank you to the fans, old and new, who have shown so much love to God of War over the last 20 years, making it possible for us to keep making these games. Cory Barlog. Introduction. We must be better. After God of War Ascension hit shelves in March of 2013, the general feeling at Santa Monica Studio, SMS, was that the series had run its course. Yes, the parting image in God of War 3, the chronological finale of the Greek era, a trail of blood leading to the sea, suggested Kratos had survived his gruesome, game-ending self-impalement. But enthusiasm for God of War sequels, or even prequels like Ascension, seemed cool at best. Yet Cory Barlog, a key creative contributor, felt a nagging sense of regret. Despite robust sales and general acclaim for the series, Barlog thought its protagonist deserved better. He felt Kratos had a somewhat uneven, underdeveloped character arc across those stories. At the end of 7 epic games, says Barlog, Kratos was still basically just really angry. You know, shaking his fist at the sky and shouting a lot. So when Santa Monica Studio lured Barlog back in 2013 to oversee a God of War reboot, he jumped at the chance to recast the core narrative and add layers of depth to what he called our two-dimensional rage monster. Although he brought back much of the original development team, Barlog challenged them to rethink everything: setting, narrative themes, art design and environments, combat and camera mechanics. The overriding message would eventually be articulated by Kratos himself. We are not who we were. We must be better. It was a creative gamble with a lot at stake. And as you'll see, the creative stakeholders on the team held some passionate and sometimes conflicting views. Did they succeed? We all know that answer. 5 years later, the reinvented God of War swept every major Game of the Year award for 2018. And today, 7 years later, is still widely considered one of the greatest games of all time. It also laid the groundwork for a magnificent sequel, the culmination of the Norse-era cycle, God of War Ragnarok. In a nutshell, our God of War is about Kratos teaching his son how to be a better god, and Atreus teaching his father how to be a better man. Richard Gaubert, writer of story and narrative design. Part 1, God of War 2018, April 20th, 2018. Prologue, Change is Possible. When studio founder Alan Becker left SMS in the spring of 2011 to take over Sony Interactive Entertainment's Japan operation, he convinced Shannon Studstill to step in as a successor. Shannon was always the linchpin in the culture that fueled our success, he says. She was my only candidate. Again, after God of War Ascension had fallen short of sales and critical expectations, many at Sony felt the brand had peaked. But Studstill disagreed and began the process of reinvigorating the studio's vaunted support mindset that she calls its superpower. The studio Alan founded was special because we didn't just make a product, we crafted it, said Studstill. Sure, you need checks and balances, but you can be efficient and still give your talent the freedom to take creative risks. She knew that SMS culture was built on a close collaborative partnership between production and design, making sure both sides understood and trusted each other, with ideas flowing freely both ways. A pivotal launch. One of Studstill's early moves was to contact Cory Barlog, director of God of War 2, and a key contributor to the overall look, feel, and narrative arc of the series. Barlog, she felt, could not only help revive the series, but also be a cornerstone in the kind of studio culture she wanted to reinvigorate. They touched base regularly for a few months, discussing various options. Both believed the God of War franchise could still thrive, but they agreed that the story and its iconic anti-hero needed a dramatic pivot. Studstill vividly remembers the lunch at a Santa Monica beach restaurant, where Barlog, who'd recently become a father for the first time, looked at her and said, "Kratos needs a kid." Inside Look, a safe space. Culture isn't really something you can predefine. You can have a philosophy, but in the end, it's about the people you bring in. Our studio was so fortunate to have people like Shannon and David and Yumi and Cory come together and create a safe space to be bold, to try new things. One of the most important things is a tolerance for failure. Without that, people can't take risks. And if you can't take risks, you can't be truly great. It's a delicate thing, but I think if creative people can take risks, yet feel safe, it promotes the kind of passion that leads to greatness. And that was Alan Becker, founder of Santa Monica Studio. I was sold on that first sentence, she says. What better way to deepen the core of a character? I totally got it. And I knew I could get an important subset of people leaning into the idea. One of those was Studstill's boss, Scott Rohed, Senior VP of Sony Interactive Entertainment Worldwide Studios. Rohed agreed that such a hard pivot was risky, but could revitalize the franchise. We had faith in Corey's narrative instincts, of course, he says. But as Shannon put it, we also believed in ourselves, in the brand, the studio, and our processes. For his part, Barlog was surprised by his former producer's quick buy-in. I told Shannon I wanted total freedom to strip the story down to its base element. Toss out everything that doesn't reinforce that, then rebuild from the ground up. Same with the gameplay. Just rethink everything. Honestly, I thought she'd laugh at me. But not only did she get on board, she got everybody else on board too. The way in. One of the central rules of filmmaking, according to the great director Sam Mendes, is find your own way into a story. Find a way that's personal and meaningful, and make it your own. Having my own son, well, I felt the powerful change in perspective that parenthood brings, how it can rock your world in fundamental ways. I believe this would give Kratos the second chance he needed. It was his path to redemption. That was Corey Barlog on God of War's core narrative. Inside look, building the perfect teammate. Working on God of War Ascension multiplayer, we really dug deep into how team play works best. What do you like when you're playing with other people? What do you hate? So when Corey gave us Atreus as a companion character, we decided to build the world's best teammate, someone whose presence makes the game more fun and tactically interesting. The last thing we wanted was some sort of ongoing escort mission with a poor innocent kid you're forced to constantly protect. That's a bad teammate, right? But he shouldn't steal my kills. He shouldn't get in my way. He shouldn't make anything worse. His skills should complement mine. Our list of behavioral characteristics for the boy was not a short one. Jason McDonald, gameplay design lead. Barlog agreed to assemble a small team of 10 or so for initial concept development. Studstill offered them 2 years to slowly ramp up, while Santa Monica Studio focused most of its resources on finishing an ambitious new original unnamed project. She also brought in Yumi Yang to oversee the reboot's development. It just made sense given Yumi's history of working closely with Corey, she says. She was the perfect choice to shepherd those early stages, building many milestones and supporting the team. On managing creativity, putting a dev team together is in part a mechanical process. It's important to be organized, to know what the workflow is, so everyone can clearly identify where it's going well and where it isn't. But it's also a creative process, and it can't be a top-down endeavor. When you have talented people, you give them tools and freedom. Let them find their own solutions and demand accountability in return. And that was from Yumi Yang, Director of Product Development on God of War in 2018. And here's a photo of Yumi Yang and Shannon Studstill at the Playa Vista campus. Inside look, Leviathan's origin tale. Originally, the axe lacked any unique powers, but coming in the wake of a weapon like the Blades of Chaos, it felt underwhelming to see Kratos just swing a regular axe. Internally, we used to call it the Home Depot axe, but Vince Napoli, lead systems designer, and George Mawley, senior programmer, got to work on prototypes for throwing and recalling the axe. Vince was inspired by Thor's hammer, obviously. This recall behavior made people start to love the axe. Now it felt like a fun toy, very simple and familiar in concept, but novel and exciting in execution. It was grounded and real. No meters or video gameisms. You throw it, it sticks, you recall it. And it all happens with such a satisfying physicality. The next plan was to make it a blood axe. You toss it into a foe, and it would remain lodged, draining blood until you recalled it. Apart from being thematically questionable, that gameplay idea just didn't catch on with the team, but some early prototypes of Atreus gave him a frost arrow that slowed down enemies. Vince decided to borrow, i.e. steal, that idea for the axe, and it was so popular with us that it became the primary theming for the weapon. In the end, we knew we had something special when testers would just keep throwing and recalling the axe in a level and not doing the work they were supposed to be doing. That was Mihir Shith, combat technical designer for God of War 2018. Now above, you have Mihir Shith speaking with the team within the combat pod. And then there's gameplay footage there. And here we have some more pictures. Above here we have Ariel Lawrence and Derek Daniels in the studio in 2015. And Jason McDonald at the Santa Monica studio office right here. From ramp to launchpad. Thinking he had a long runway for takeoff, Barlog began luring in a handful of trusted franchise veterans, like Eric Williams, Derek Daniels, and Jason McDonald. People who'd been in the God of War trenches from its earliest days. To start kicking around ideas. Again, his goal was to deconstruct the God of War formula, then rebuild it from its most essential pieces. Barlog has said his meeting mantra during the conceptual stage was, if you know the rules, you can break the rules. I would say to them, look, we know God of War better than anybody. He says, so we can take it apart, then put it back together even better. He felt it gave the team a sense of agency and made them feel empowered. But on February 25th, 2014, one of the darkest days in studio history dramatically changed the team's mission trajectory. After a disappointing internal review, Sony abruptly canceled the unannounced project. More than half its team members were laid off, with the rest, about 100 others, offered positions on the new God of War project. A sudden influx of talent that its core group was not yet ready to accommodate. Stud still vividly remembers the turmoil. Those folks were in shock and grieving, she says, and we didn't really have anything for them to do yet. It was my first day on the team, recalls Daniels, who had become design director for the project. Shannon calls me into her office and says my first job is to figure out what to do with 100 new people. Many of them felt a natural loyalty to the Lost Project and colleagues, and Daniels says survivor's guilt was everywhere. The mood was not good, and here we were about to ask them to start building an airplane as we were flying it. Inside look, making big moves. Moving after 15 years from Penn Station to the Reserve, the new 20-acre studio facility in Playa Vista, California, changing the very walls of the structure around us, I started to formulate this total reboot scenario. We had a great opportunity to look at everything differently. Like, what's going to carry over? What should we revisualize? Changing the logo was a first step in that process of finding things we can recircle and maybe rediscover. As for God of War, it seemed short-sighted to put the franchise to rest, which was the general thinking after Ascension. After overseeing production on God of War 2, Studstill had left SMS for 3 years, before returning in 2011 to replace Alan Becker as studio head. I mean, we talked about exploring other mythologies beyond Greek way back at the very beginning. Why not consider that now? The engine was old and tired, so there was a technology piece to consider too. More importantly, I also wanted to reboot the studio culture. A lot of levers needed to be readjusted. I thought, let's refresh the nurture and trust of creative people to make Santa Monica's studio great. Let's get back to that collaboration and support mindset. Shannon Studstill, head of Santa Monica Studio from 2011 to 2020, who guided the 2018 reboot of God of War. Here we have some pictures, images of the Penn Station building. This was the original campus for Santa Monica Studio before its relocation to Playa Vista, right here. And to top off the trauma, Santa Monica Studio had already begun the process of physically relocating from its longtime Penn Station offices to a sprawling new 30,000 square foot facility in Playa Vista called the Reserve, where the studio is still located today. That move, completed in July, complicated the dynamics of the workforce's transition between projects. Overnight, we went from a cozy concept team to everyone wondering what's the new pipeline, what's the engine, says Barlog, and where is everybody gonna sit? There was a lot of flux, recalls Yang, but honestly, my belief in our project never wavered, because my experience with this team was we always figure it out. We always deliver. We always get there. Breaking and re-entering. With a new accelerated schedule, Barlog's team scrambled to put together an action plan with overview presentations for the incoming wave. The conceptual discussions kicked into a higher gear as well. Again, the idea had been to rethink everything, and many of the key early decisions were indeed bold. A few were outright controversial. Even within the core group, redirecting a flagship franchise is like turning an aircraft carrier. There's a lot of inertial force pushing things in the current direction. To say we had creative differences would be sort of an understatement, laughs Barlog. He got intense. But in retrospect, well, even back then really, even in the thick of it, that's what made the whole project so gratifying. Everybody cared so much. If you had a new idea or an objection, you'd better be able to articulate it well and defend it. It pushed all of us to dig deep. On the right here, there's Derek Daniels with Bruno Velasquez in the background there, ascending the stairs during the opening day celebration of the new Playa Vista Studios in 2014. Inside look. Corey's story. In hindsight, leaving Santa Monica Studio during God of War 3 to work with George Miller, famed creator of the Mad Max movie series, taught me that I had no idea what the hell I was doing directing. Working with George was an education I never could have gotten anywhere else. I grew 1,000-fold. Then the stars aligned and Shannon invited me to meet at GDC, the Game Developers Conference. We had dinner with Eric Williams, and she pitched us on returning to the studio. I said yes, but that I'd want to do something insanely different and unexpected. Basically rebuild God of War from the ground up. Shannon helped us put together a core team, and we listed every aspect of God of War on a board. Then we started crossing things off that list. We wanted to identify the load-bearing parts. What are the things that, if you pull them out, the structure collapses? We were surprised at how much we could yank out and keep it still standing. The first controversial thing, of course, was putting Kratos in the role of single parent. I wanted him to change and grow and deepen. Sure, he traveled 1,000 miles to change his life, but at least some of the growth had to happen before our eyes so it's believable. His struggle with fatherhood had to be the story core. Then I proposed the one-shot camera, force the player to have this unflinching holistic experience, never cutting away from Kratos' perspective. Sorry, you don't get to see what the villain is doing. Yeah, that was a hard sell. It took a while to get full buy-in, and to be honest, I didn't really know if it was right. No clue whatsoever. It was just a feeling in my stomach. Corey Barlog, game director of God of War in 2018. Inside look, the portent of the Fireflies. A note from Corey Barlog. There were 2 short stories written during the pre-production stage of God of War in 2018. Inside look, the portent of the Fireflies. A note from Cory Barlog. There were 2 short stories written during the pre-production stage of God of War in 2018. The first of these short stories, The Hunt, was eventually used to create the start of the game. The second, The Portent of the Fireflies, has never been shared outside of the team until now. A gentle wind rustles through the forest canopy, sending waves through the branches of the countless birch and evergreen trees all around. The father walks with cautious intent through the thick undergrowth as the sun trails behind, stomping and humming, seemingly lost in his own world. Even though the patter crunch of the boy's stomps, even through the patter crunch of the boy's stomps, Kratos can hear and pinpoint all the sounds around him and is always on alert for any potential danger. Overhead, the sky is a hazy mist of gray, dropping slowly down onto the land, allowing only the tiniest cracks of sunlight to penetrate the dense roof of foliage. The streaks of golden light break up the overcast blue tones of the forest, giving the landscape an alien look to it, as if the trees and plants themselves were emanating lines of golden light. A slow-building rumble of thunder rolls overhead, followed shortly by a brilliant flash of light just beyond a rise of trees to the north. The boy whimsically hops up on a mossy, snow-covered tree branch that twists and curls out in several directions, like the aged hand of a witch claiming the patch of land as her own. A storm is coming, isn't it, Papa? The child's voice is flat and trance-like, as if he is speaking in the deepest of sleep from a place far away. A storm is always coming, son, the father says, as he pauses next to the boy, their eyes open and level from the boy's perch on the tree branch. Their eyes even and level from the boy's perch on the tree branch. That is why a warrior is always prepared. Kratos wraps his arm around his son's waist, and with a single effortless motion, he lifts and deposits the boy on the ground with a wet crunch. For anything. Another rumble of thunder passes overhead as the pair wind through the forest, and the boy looks to the sky as if searching for the source. Are the gods fighting up there? The father lets the question hang in silence for a bit as they push through dense, overgrown thickets, before finally saying, "The battle overhead is one between the clouds and the sky. There are no gods there, boy." The child's pace slows a bit as he looks at Kratos through half-closed eyes. An expression of skepticism washes over him. "Really?" he says, slightly drawing the word out to accentuate his disbelief. "You do not believe my words, son?" Kratos stops and kneels down, placing his hand gently on the boy's shoulder. "Everything around us, from this dirt," he says, scooping up a fistful of damp earth and letting it spill out between his fingers, "to these trees you see, all the way up to the sky above our heads, lives on each day with no effect from the gods." The father turns to the son, locking eyes, and speaks with a firm tone. "Hear me. The gods are nothing but thieves, hiding in the shadows, cowards undeserving of affection or worship. A true warrior has no need for the gods." The father places his palm to the boy's chest. His heart guides his sword in battle and directs his feet in life. The boy's lower lip pushes up slowly, arching his mouth into a slight frown as he gazes at his father, searching for the right words in response. Those words fail to materialize, and he drops his head toward the ground with a defeated sigh. "Yes, father." Kratos stands and arches his back, throwing his arms out in a great stretching motion. The snap and pop of joints crackles as he takes in the crisp air with a powerful inhalation. He exhales, dropping his arms a few inches from the boy, but not touching him, slouching his chest slightly. After a moment, without looking down at his son, he says, "The storm is almost upon us, and the mountains grow no closer while we stand here. We must go." The father begins to walk just as the son is reaching out for his father. Had the motion been a few seconds earlier, the small, pale hand crusted in day-old mud and blood would have met its target. But as it always has been, the boy's timing is off, and his grip meets nothing but air. Kratos continues on through the forest without a look back, oblivious of the gesture. The boy sighs, hefts his bow further up on his shoulder, and begins to walk after his father. After a few steps, his foot hits a slick bit of rock, causing him to topple over slightly and flap his arms about for the briefest of moments before catching his balance and continuing on. Frustration reads in his posture, and he no longer hums or stomps. Almost without thought, he stays several meters behind his father. They walk for a bit through the maze of rocks, trees, and winding streams as the sky and clouds continue the battle overhead. The black hands of approaching night begin to slowly close in upon them as light mist of rain blankets the surrounding forest with a glistening layer of wet ice. A flash blooms just off the periphery of the father's vision. His neck tightens and his senses go on high alert. Operating merely on primal instinct, Kratos steers the two forward the source of the flash, drawing them into a particularly dense patch of snow-crusted trees. Just ahead of them, a single spark flickers and then disappears as quickly as it came, like an errant ember from a distant fire. The father's hand moves to the hilt of his weapon and hovers as his pace slows. He sniffs the air for the scent of a freshly extinguished fire, but the crisp smell of the forest remains unchanged. The boy, picking up on the change in his father's movements, slows down to a creep. Closer still, another ember spirals up from behind the peeling trunk of a birch tree and pulses, then another and another, until it seems an entire cloud of swirling embers moves toward the father and son. The sounds of the forest seem to have evaporated as a wave of pulsing embers begins to sweep all around the father and son, washing over them like a tidal swell of light. The father's stance drops, his hand claps his weapon, and all of his muscles flare at the ready as he scans the surroundings for the threat he knows must be there. The son's face shows only a wide-eyed expression of amazement as the flashing embers seem to dance all around him. Through a bewildered smile, he says, "These are fairies, aren't they, Papa?" The boy slowly sweeps his hand in front of his face, causing the sea of luminescent creatures to break and swirl in front of him. He fans his spread-out fingers as a lighted swarm of flickering creatures swims around his movements. All around the father and son, the forest dances and flashes with thousands of tiny pulsating lights, giving an otherworldly feeling to the surroundings. The scene is truly surreal, almost alien if it were not for the presence of two travelers. Dozens of little lights have landed on Kratos' shoulders and head as he slowly scans the surrounding forest for any unseen aggressors. The boy laughs as a cluster of flashing bugs encrust his outstretched arm, making it feel as if it is made of pure undulating light. He waves his arm back and forth, letting the light play on the foliage around him. Have you ever seen so many? The boy takes notice of his father's heightened awareness and moves closer to him in an effort to ease his tension. "We are safe, Papa. Fairies are meant to help the traveler." The boy holds his hand close to his face, making a small perch with his finger as one of the creatures lands on his finger and pulses in a staccato rhythm. Cine said so. His puffs of breath send the tiny creature spiraling through the air, flickering its light madly. All around them the forest dances in a light show so spectacular that even Kratos appears to momentarily soften. His tightened muscles ease, satisfied that a threat is not nearby. Large patches of the incandescent creatures move like synchronized schools of fish, quickly changing directions as a pack, blinking in response to other nearby swarms. The slow undulation of light and darkness makes the forest seem alive, as if it is taking great breaths in and out, washing warmth over the father and son. Papa, look! The boy spins around with both arms outstretched, sending large clouds of the fairy spinning into the air like a radiant tornado. The son explodes with laughter, a chuckle born of total wonder and freedom. His joy echoes all around them, filling the vast emptiness of the forest, penetrating through them and filling an unseen emptiness inside. The radiant swarms appear to flash, almost in response to the boy's laughter. Through an ear-to-ear smile, the boy calls out to his father, "They're talking to me." The child crinkles his nose with satisfaction, clenches his fists, and belts out a loud bellowing laugh. The flocks of light flicker and undulate in response once again, causing the boy's laughter to flood out freely. "Papa, look, I'm a great wave in the ocean," the son proclaims loudly, and with his arms still outstretched, he slowly falls back into a patch of light-pocked ferns. The soft thud of impact rings out and sends a cloud of flickering fireflies into the air, like a beautiful wave of light, cresting over his head as the boy laughs and laughs with amusement. This sudden display of wonder and joy softens the creased, time-worn face of Kratos ever so slightly, and beneath the tangle of gray and black of his beard, a small smile begins to form. He moves toward the boy, holding his hand out, palm up, collecting dozens of the tiny balls of light. "How about a great fire-breathing dragon?" Kratos sucks air in deeply, puffing his chest out, pausing for just a moment to see his son's excited expression, and then blows out with a powerful exhalation, sending a steady stream of illuminated creatures that gives the effect of the flaming breath of a mighty dragon. This is met with more laughter from his son, a hearty laughter so infectious that even Kratos lets out a short, amused harumph. "Do it again, Papa," the son says through rapid-fire giggles. With a light shrug and a smile that dares to show the slightest bit of teeth, Kratos raises his hand up to gather more fireflies, when the silence is broken by a soft cracking of a tree branch in the distance. With lightning-quick reflexes, Kratos spins toward the sound, simultaneously drawing his weapon and placing himself between the boy and the potential danger. The fast motion sends tiny swarms of light, blooming creatures into the air, just as his son rolls onto his back and then up to his feet, drawing his bow and notching an arrow in a single well-practiced motion. Kratos stands at the ready, all of his preternatural senses focused on the point in space where the sound emitted from while the boy sweeps the surroundings with his bow. "What is it, father?" whispers the son. Kratos responds with a sharp hushing sound that tells the boy it is time for him to shut up and follow his father's lead. The dazzling light show quickly continues to dissipate as the fairies scatter. He speaks in a low tone to the darkness all around. "Show yourself." An inhuman throaty rattle, a creature's gravelly hiss that is familiar yet foreign to them, breaks the silence. The sound rises and falls in volume and changes position as if it is moving all around them. The first sound is followed by rapid footfalls crunching on the ground, and then joined by several other hisses and guttural flattering in the line. Kratos' body is at full tension as he curses himself for being so careless, eyes darting back and forth as he scans the tree line. He barks quickly to the son. There are 3, maybe 4. The son's face betrays his otherwise poised sense of calm, with a distinct pallor of panic. The feathers of his notched arrow rub the skin beneath his eye as he attempts to distinguish several patches of darkness where the sounds appear to be emanating from. With bated breath, he whispers, "Yes, but 3 or 4 what?" "Valkyries," Kratos says hurriedly. "They found us again." The clicks and groans of the Valkyries, the trusted bounty hunters of the Asgard come to collect on the debt Kratos incurred by killing Thor, seem to be closing in from all directions simultaneously now. In a flash of clarity, Kratos realizes that the appearance of the fairies always seems to precede the arrival of the Valkyries. Perhaps it is some kind of sign that they approach. As fast as the thought comes into his head, it fades away into the recesses of his brain as a flood of impulses from his primal brain takes hold. One thing is for certain. If they have found them again this far north, then it must not matter where they go in all of Midgard. The Valkyries will pursue them. Kratos has only one choice now. He must get his son to the safety of Jotunheim immediately. Another staccato grunt is followed by a litany of footfalls all around them. But before the flight instinct is allowed to influence his path, the more powerful fight instinct tells him he has to deal with these Valkyries. Through gritted teeth he grumbles to his son, "You fire when I tell you. No sooner. Aim for the small between the eyes." Back to back, the father and son circle slowly and sweep the darkness as the unseen creatures gradually advance on them. The last embers of fairy light spiral away into the forest, the faint echoes of wonder and innocence fading like tendrils of smoke as the two warriors prepare for combat. Frankly, some people thought we were breaking God of War, adds Eric Williams. And in a way we were, but in a good way. The first controversy, of course, was giving Kratos' son, who was also an in-game companion character. Barlog admits he was uncompromising about not only putting the father-son dynamic at the core of the story, but also at the heart of the action. The team agreed that Atreus, known only as son in the early going, needed to be a worthy partner for Kratos in classic God of War combat. Even more contentious was Barlog's desire for a grounded, intimate documentary style with a radical twist, a no-cut camera locked in a tight, player-controlled swivel around Kratos, much closer to the action in comparison to the Greek games. This new God of War would unfold in a non-stop tracking shot, rolling through every moment of gameplay, from travel to combat to cutscene to dialogue, first scene to last. Resistance was strong at first. Nearly half the team thought the technical challenge would require too much bandwidth to implement, but Barlog saw this new camera design as critical to creating the intimacy, emotional punch, and close connection to the characters he wanted. In the past, God of War was really more about spectacle than character arcs, says Williams. Corey wanted immediacy, and the camera was a big part of that. Inside look, things change. I was on the unnamed project when it got canceled in 2014. As was a lot of the team, I was pretty veteran at that point. Nothing came as a surprise anymore. I started doing audio design way back in 1999. I came to Santa Monica in 2005, part of the Paradox Exodus. Corey Barlog, Eric Williams, Derek Daniels, Bruno Velasquez, we all started there. And I'd worked with Corey for years before he left God of War 3, so I was comfortable moving over to his God of War reboot. But I won't lie, the project shutdown was a bummer, people getting laid off. Those of us who moved over to God of War, the survivors, it was just a weird place to be. We got closer for sure, but it was still hard. A lot of those people who had to go, I'd spent more actual time with them than anybody else in my life. They were family to me, a special bond for sure. I'm always amazed at how much things change along the way on these huge projects. First off, every new title, you're usually designing for a brand new console. Memory allocations change. That's never easy. And then the game cycles are so long. Late in the cycle, you open an old file and go, "This is a mess. What was I thinking here?" But you just forgive yourself for things you didn't know back when you started. Yeah, things change. Embrace it. Just do the next task and think, what new stuff am I going to learn this time? One thing I learned about Santa Monica Studio, everybody will do what they need to do. We've all done it before. It's gonna get done. There's just no point in getting too stressed out. And that was from Todd Pieperl, Technical Sound Design Lead on God of War in 2018. Another hotly debated change had to do with the decision to replace, at least until mid-game, one of the most famous icons in God of War's iconography, Kratos' signature weapon, the Blades of Chaos. Replacing the blades with a throwable axe was a hard sell for the leadership team, but the eventual lore explanation that Leviathan was crafted by the fabled Haldir brothers, the dwarven weaponsmiths also responsible for Thor's legendary hammer Mjolnir, gave it a coolness factor that was hard to resist. It also helped that, like Mjolnir, the Leviathan axe gave the player an awesome in-game mechanic for instant retrieval. Overall, the general plan for gameplay design was to rebalance the sides of the action-adventure equation. We really nailed that action half back in 2005, says Derek Daniels. People loved it, the brutality of it, and so he doubled down on action in each of the succeeding Greek titles. But for the Norse God of War, he says, he really wanted to bring back the adventure half, stunning environments to explore, thoughtful organic puzzles to solve, and most importantly, a narrative depth linking everything, with more sophisticated storytelling and character development. This is Cory Barlog in the Santa Monica Studio bullpen. There's some pictures here. Inside look, grown-up gameplay. Even before Cory's pitch for a rebooted God of War, senior members of our studio team were already focusing on how the video game demographic was maturing, developing new sets of expectations. Kids who grew up playing the Greek God of War games were now young adults. Overall audience taste was shifting away from a pure gamey style to a fuller experience, one with meaningful stories and characterizations. We'd always tried to bring a solid narrative layer to our series. Even the first God of War had a story arc built on the tragedy of Kratos and his family, but we never drilled very deep into that. So, in general, the old crew was very open to Cory's new ideas for expanding the human side of Kratos. Yes, our combat design would always aspire to be the best in our genre, but we wanted to balance out the gameplay experience. We wanted to help Cory craft that perfect blend of great mechanics and pacing with an authentic narrative depth. The new weapon, the Leviathan axe, took a while to shine, but that final design is a thing of beauty, isn't it? The fun factor is high, and making Atreus a companion character, critical to not only the story but also the gameplay and combat. Look, I admit that I was skeptical. This idea of a little boy running around Kratos the whole time, while he's tearing foes limb from limb, my knee-jerk reaction was strong. Like, how do the logistics work? What's the kid doing while you solve puzzles and execute other basic gameplay stuff? But great thing about Santa Monica Studio is the way we've always been open to ideas that may seem even counterintuitive at first. Every director in the God of War franchise has had ideas like that challenged assumptions and opened eyes. I've loved working on every installment for that reason, and I decided I'll let Matt and Rich, the lead writers, worry about how Atreus resonates narratively. My job will be to make sure the kid feels good in relation to the player. The way we thought about it was, Kratos is training Atreus to be a Spartan-style warrior, and it becomes an important physical component of their connection as father and son. So, let's design a kind of teamwork that manifests that important story dynamic. That was Jason McDonald, gameplay design lead for God of War 2018. Some more art, and Atreus and Kratos right here. A new setting, stranger in a strange land. Again, Cory Barlog had set the reboot's conceptual ground rules early. Knocked down all the old pillars of gameplay, art, story, and character. identify the essential DNA of the God of War experience, and then rebuild from that essence. By 2014, games were changing, becoming more thematically sophisticated. Barlog pointed his concept team to titles like The Last of Us and the Dark Souls series as new sources of inspiration. And God of War 3's apocalyptic ending, Mount Olympus destroyed, its pantheon decimated, left Kratos little choice but to reemerge in an entirely new place. The team debated two options, Norse and Egyptian. Ultimately, we ended up choosing Norse because I felt Kratos would have wanted to put as much distance as possible between himself and his past in Greece, says Barlog. Egypt was just too geographically close for the first game of this new mythological era. Chris Sutton, art director at the time, he left SMS in January 2016, also recalls discussion of the technical aspects of the choice. Egyptian settings would likely require a focus on heavily populated urban areas, filled with NPCs, surrounded by vast stretches of desert, he says. Crafting Norse realms would offer a much greater variety of topography and biome, with few, if any, large busy cities. With the choice made, Barlog also called for a fresh take on Norse mythology, one that could veer away from current depictions of Vikings or the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Luke Berliner, concept art lead, points out that the archival record doesn't offer much on how mythical Norse realms are supposed to look, so we had a lot of freedom to create the realms we wanted, he says, with environments that reflected our narrative themes. John Palarmchuk, environment art lead and a veteran of the previous 3 Greek-era games, reports that nearly everybody on his team got fired up about the jump into a pre-Viking Norse world, a primeval time when gods and monsters roamed the realms. We still had Kratos, the character we loved, he says, but we could create something entirely new. Inside look, exploration with hooks. We loved reconnecting to our adventure game roots, but we realized at one point that our main story, awesome as it is, might end up being shorter than the DLC packs of other AAA games. So I spearheaded an effort to expand our exploration aspect. We put together a small team led by Luis Sanchez and Andrew Chrysophitis, the level design leads, to whip up more side quests. At first I thought we'd just throw in some good standalone dungeons. That was our original pitch anyway. Wander around, kill some creatures, level up, whatever. But then Lewis says, hey, I think we need to give you a better reason why you're doing these quests. Get some narrative hooks into them. Make them echo the central story themes. So this little splinter group starts designing all these great exploration levels with input from Matt and Rich. Honestly, I thought our side quests were just as much fun and thematically meaningful as any other game's main story missions. The balance of story and exploration ended up being nicely calibrated and added a whole new dimension to the gameplay. And when all was said and done, we'd basically doubled the size of the game. Derek Daniels, design director on God of War 2018. Our jump into the Norse world was a massive leap in many ways. The tone change was significant. Calmer and more collected, but also grittier and more real, less comic book. Everything had more weight to it. One day our art director brought in a big chunk of a birch tree he chopped down on his acreage and dropped it on an artist's desk. He was like, here's your reference. That made it feel real. Another thing to hit on the scale of real things. He built a box, 1 meter by 1 meter, and said, Kratos jumps over objects this size in the game. Kratos is 2 meters tall, about 6 feet 4 inches, which is certainly big. But standing in front of that box was imposing. It sounds funny, but having it there really helped us envision and sculpt authentic environments that made sense. John Palarmchuk, environment art lead on God of War 2018. Environment art is just breathing life into everything around the characters, right? I'll never forget working on Wildwoods for the playable demo we showed at the big PlayStation reveal for E3 2016. I timed out all the assets and told Nate, Stevens, environment art lead, I needed 4 weeks to create the base kit, plus another week to build the opening chunk where you step outside Kratos' hut in the forest. A lot of pressure there. We committed to designing a natural world with a super high level of fidelity, and we knew a lot of eyeballs would be on it. Chris Sutton, the art director, had this great idea of moving the tree canopies above eye level for a lot cleaner read of ground levels. Enemies wouldn't get lost in the branch noise. It worked great, and we got the art pieces delivered on time. I was pretty proud of that, and I'll never forget the crazy audience reaction at that screening in the huge theater. Dan McKim, Environment Art on God of War 2018. In July of 2015, Shannon Studstill led a cross-section of SMS team members, from art, design, production, and programming, on a research trip to Iceland to help stoke the creative fires. The effect was bracing, as the stark Nordic beauty galvanized the team's creative vision. The landscape was just magical, says Studstill. I could feel the game in my heart for the first time. A new story, our father-son saga. How does one reinvent an iconic character with a long storied history? Cory Barlog says he admired Dana Jan's Ghost of Sparta for getting closer to the hero's heart, revealing some of the tragic history that informs his rage. But despite Barlog's epiphany about the redemptive second chance possibilities of fatherhood, he admits his first God of War story pass spread itself too wide. Too much Norse realm politics, he says. So he tossed out 6 months of work, and his narrative design team of Matt Sophos and Richard Gubbert began to craft a more personal tale, narrowing the spotlight to the core father-son story as Barlog first envisioned. Gubbert and Sophos, who'd been working together for almost 20 years, took Barlog's overall vision and broke it down into story beats on cards, arranged on a whiteboard. Barlog would consult regularly as they built the story, and their script pages began flowing. Cory's vision was always the North Star, but Rich and I had a lot of input and a great shorthand way of collaborating, says Sophos. We all grew to share the same brain. What Kratos wants in 2018. Classic storytelling often explores what your character wants most and puts it in conflict with what he's most afraid of. In our God of War, Kratos gets stuck with something he absolutely does not want, due to past failure and trauma. Being a dad, raising a kid, he's afraid he'll pass on his bad traits, his rage and brutality, to Atreus. But we build the relationship slowly until eventually it becomes the thing Kratos actually cherishes most. And then, in the end, in God of War Ragnarok, we force him to let it go. Matt Sophos, writer, story, and narrative design lead. Inside look, boating with Dad. One new narrative device that met resistance at first was the use of canoe travel interludes as an organic way to add pacing and narrative depth, deepen the father-son interactions, and introduce key aspects of some Norse lore via Mimir's I Was There storytelling. Some of our people didn't like the boat stuff at first, recalls Eric Williams, but we told them, hey, this is where you trust Cory's vision. Jeet Schroff, gameplay programming lead, said his team knew it had a winner when his test monitors began noticing how players in focused testing groups would often stop the boat just before reaching a dock. They just sit there unmoving in the water, says Schroff. At first we wondered, are they lost, confused, don't know what to do next? Then we realized they're waiting to hear the end of a boat talk sequence. In the end, Mimir's scintillating boat tales and the Kratos-Atreus exchanges on the water became fan favorites. My God, I love those, says Alistair Duncan, the voice of Mimir. So well written, such a joy to do. Pure storytelling. Each one had an emotional arc that I would just absolutely connect with, and it was probably a nice break for players to hear a meaningful story or two in between killing all those berserkers and whatnot. Other related story elements were Barlog's vision of Kratos as a classic stranger in a strange land, and the notion of found family. How's life's rocky sojourn can bring you into the orbit of people like Freya, Mimir, Brock, and Sindri, strangers who eventually became familial figures, and as with Faye, even beloved partners. Bit by bit, the narrative pieces fell together, pared down and more compelling in their simplicity. Even the acclaimed composer Bear McCreary, Barlog's dream choice to compose the game's score, hopped aboard the project because of what he calls the campfire story, told by Barlog in their first meeting. Corey ran me through the plot, and I just wanted to roast marshmallows and keep asking, and then what happened, laughs McCreary. With a score from me, it's always the story that draws me musically, that triggers my ideas. And this game, it's such a captivating, well-thought-out story, I thought, I just have to be involved in this. Fathers and sons. Corey, Matt, and I all had young boys. Certain parent-child things from our own lives would go on a story card that end up in the game. For example, kid gets sick, right? Like really sick, and you're scared. So you put your palm on his forehead to check his temperature, and somebody tells you, no, use the back of your hand. Freya says this to Kratos in the game. We're thinking, how does this human moment connect to the bigger picture, to the looming unresolved issue of the boy's godhood? And so his sickness becomes much more than the flu. It's a deeper internal conflict within Atreus, whose resolution becomes a major plot point. That was from Richard Gobbert, writer, story, and narrative design. Inside look, the Greek roots of a hero's change. Appropriately enough, the dramatic pedigree of Kratos' profound transformation in the Northland cycle, the assertion that change is possible, traces back to Greek roots. The worldview of Greek tragedy particularly is expressed by its earliest known master, Aeschylus, suggests that suffering need not be merely embittering. It is also a powerful source of self-knowledge. As the Encyclopedia Britannica points out, the capacity to learn through suffering is a distinguishing characteristic of the Greek tragic hero. He has not merely courage, tenacity, and endurance, but also the ability to grow by means of these qualities into an understanding of himself, his fellows, and the conditions of existence. In other words, the hero is not strictly bound by an immutable fate. He can use his hard-earned knowledge to change course for the good. When Kratos saves Freya's life by killing her reckless son Balder, she turns fiercely on him and says, "You are just an animal, passing on your cruelty and rage. You will never change." But Kratos refuses to accept this harsh judgment. He turns to his son Atreus and says, "No, we will be the gods we choose to be. What I was is not who you will be. We must be better." Later, in God of War Ragnarok, he reiterates this message when he tells Atreus, "Fate only binds you if you let it. Do what is necessary, not because it is written." Also in God of War Ragnarok, we learn one source of this wisdom. In a flashback, we see Kratos' partner Faye, Lofi the Great, the legendary giantess warrior, mother of Atreus, tell him simply, "We are not our failures. We are not who we were. We must be better." Eventually, we hear the words of the Norns themselves on the topic, the primordial Norse goddesses of fate, when Uro tells Kratos and Freya, "There is no grand design, no script, only the choices you make. That your choices are so predictable merely makes us seem prescient." A new look mythical realism. Aside from the radical redesign of gameplay elements previously mentioned, the no-cut camera, an active companion character, and a new primary weapon, the God of War team was also reimagining how everything would look in its game world. The art and animation departments began crafting an updated aesthetic for environments and characters. Even though our game is technically a fantasy, there's a lot of emotional truth and authenticity in the storytelling, says Deala Longfish, concept art lead. So we wanted a very grounded, realistic, Scandinavian look and feel. Indeed, the art team's initial God of War style guide defined a central visual pillar as historical realism, a bold choice for a game set in the 9 realms of Norse mythology. but the visual catalog integrated more fantasy elements over time, according to lead character artist Ralph Grassetti. Many of the gritty, naturalistic, survival-type mechanics we envisioned, like crafting, hunting, and so forth, went by the wayside or else became more fantastical, he says. For example, our original axe was very grounded and realistic in its action, but adding runes and magical powers made it a lot more dynamic and fun in combat. Of course, even the fantastical can have natural contours, grainy layers, and so forth. In the end, the art design settled on a unique hybrid combining fantasy and a grounded look that the team called mythical realism. Another early focus was how to recast the God of War himself. The new Kratos retained most of his Greek-era physical traits: bald head, ashen skin, red tattoo, fierce eyes, but added a Viking-like beard. Ralph Grassetti also aged the Spartan with wrinkles and more heft to the midsection. A fun legacy touch. Even though Kratos wields a new primary weapon, Leviathan the Axe, clip on his back features his iconic Greek Omega symbol. His son Atreus, on the other hand, had no Greek-era baggage, and thus started as a blank slate. Barlog envisioned the boy as the opposite of Kratos in most ways, in particular more fragile in stature. We saw him as inheriting more of his mother's traits as Grassetti, being more thoughtful and sensitive, attuned to nature in his Norse environment. AAA travel services. I joke that VizDev, visual development, is like vacation planning. After the narrative team lays out the destination, we put up big reference board for notes and start asking, like, what cool places do we want to visit along the way? Of course, the key is to make sure our visuals reference and reinforce the story themes for each level of the journey. What's happening? What's the mood? Is it dark or light? What emotions do we want players to feel? That was from Luke Berliner, the concept art lead environments. We have more pictures here. Meanwhile, the environment art team took up the task of terraforming a Norseland world, conjuring up various realm topographies and biomes and architectural designs for Midgard's multiple regions, including the mountain and its cavernous interior, the Lake of Nine and Tyr's Temple, Freya's mysterious sanctuary and cave, Alfheim's Lake of Light and Ring Temple, and the frigid wasteland geometry of Helheim. The game would also provide small samples of other realms, Niflheim, Muspelheim, Jotunheim, and through a magical window, a glimpse of Vanheim. At the same time, the character art and animation teams began populating those Norse realms with a new bestiary of legendary races and creatures using the same aesthetic guideline of mythical realism. Fantastical monsters and entities that move and fight with realistic, real-world physics, terrifying yet believable. Troll, ogre, draugr, wolver, revenant, tailworm, reaver, light and dark elves, all were drawn from European folklore and recast as real grounded foes. Back in the day, our Greek animations reflected that original David Jaffe vision of Greek mythology meets heavy metal magazine, exaggerated, over the top, with snappy arcade-like hack-and-slash moves, says animation director Bruno Velasquez. Back then, we really wanted players to feel this relentless warrior power fantasy. But for his Norse game, Barlog wanted entities to move in a more naturalistic, grounded way. Barlog's own background in animation helped him communicate how he wanted his animators to deliver motion. More subtlety, more realism that players can identify and connect with, says Velasquez. That's when his animation team started bringing motion capture into the process, putting stunt actors and martial artists in motion capture suits. Human actors executing real human moves. Inside look, a grounded superhero. When motion capture technology came along, it was scary for us at first. It not only changed the way we animate, it changed our whole production pipeline. Instead of keyframe, doing it by hand, posting virtual puppets pose by pose, posing virtual puppets pose by pose. Now we'd have all these real people running around a physical stage. We had to figure it out. So we brought some mocap suits. At first it was just us, the animators, throwing on the suits and jumping on mats and climbing things and recording all the data. Good thing HR didn't see us doing all that crazy stuff. Anyway, we soon realized mocap didn't replace keyframe animation. Instead, it was this fantastic tool to augment our process. Working with actors and stunt performers, you still need the eye of the animator, the timing, the posing, everything we learned in the Greek games. Example, we wanted to infuse Kratos with a more grounded, naturalistic personality, but also keep him super heroic. That was still relevant. The powerful warrior aesthetic. Motion capture made that blending work so well. The technical transition was sometimes tough, but in the end, we were very happy we'd embraced the new techniques. That was from Bruno Velasquez, animation director of God of War 2018. Tales from the Volume, Bringing It. In the years after production wrapped for God of War Ascension in the early 2010s, the craft of character portrayal in gaming underwent a major technical overhaul. Sharp increases in console processing power made a technique called motion capture, or mocap, a widely achievable standard. The method digitally records a human actor's movements and facial expressions, then maps them to an animated 3D model for insertion into the game. The realism it can render is remarkable. A game changer, literally. Thus, Santa Monica Studio built a large mocap stage dubbed The Volume in the Reserve, the studio's new facility in Playa Vista, to capture performances. The advent of this new technique significantly changed the casting process for the God of War reboot. Cory Barlog divulges that he originally wanted T.C. Carson to reprise his role as Kratos, but the production crew essentially nixed the idea. Carson didn't have the right physical silhouette to play the hulking God of War on a mocap stage. The technology to rectify that size issue would bust the shooting budget. We knew we had to bring in a new Kratos, says Barlog, but the prospect scared me and everybody at the studio, to be honest. Any new Kratos would have to not only a huge, deep-voiced powerhouse of a figure, but also someone with high-level acting chops to sell the nuanced character transformation in Barlog's emerging story. Equally important would be the casting of Atreus, the son. If the core narrative premise was going to work, i.e., Kratos humanized and ultimately redeemed by his role as father, then the boy actor who shows him that change is possible had to be a believable catalyst. So here, for a more in-depth look at the game's award-winning art direction, be sure to check out The Art of God of War. It came out in 2018 from Dark Horse Books. Aside from the gorgeous concept art and striking production images, the book includes a wealth of illuminating behind-the-scenes commentary from the God of War art and visual development teams. Fortunately for the gaming world, Barlog happened to be a massive fan of the TV series Stargate SG-1 and its character Tilchiko Chulak, played for 10 seasons by Christopher Judge. The SMS casting team had already discovered Sonny Suljic on 8-year-old, whose easy naturalism had completely charmed Barlog and Matt Sophos, the narrative design lead. When they brought in Judge to audition for Kratos, Barlog was ecstatic. He was so unbelievably perfect. Even better, after Judge and Suljic delivered a moving and authentic chemistry read at their first meeting, the hub of the story felt solidly locked in. Chris, Sonny, that entire cast came together because of magic, says Barlog. That's the only explanation. There's a flow to the universe, and we somehow got into its current. These people just flowed into the volume. In addition to Judge and Suljic, the flow brought in Danielle Bisutti, who played Freya, Alistair Duncan, who played Mimir, Robert Craighead, who played Brock, Adam J. Harrington, who played Sindri, and Jeremy Davies, who played Baldur, a remarkable confluence of talent. The chemistry read in Scene 1. After my audition, I got called back to do a chemistry read, so I go and meet this little bug who barely comes up to my waist. I'm thinking, okay, I had kids this age, I can do this. But then we had this immediate rapport. I mean, it was so real. We're laughing, just having fun. Great kid. We had something good and real, and Corey knew it. So I get the part, and they send me to a dialect coach who starts teaching me a British accent. I figure, okay, I guess we're British, the kid and me. Weeks later, we finally do our first scene on the volume of SMS, and I deliver my line, "Stay away from the water," in my new accent. Corey calls cut and comes over and says, was that a British accent? I say, well, if you have to ask, I guess not. I'm a smartass. And he's like, why the fuck are you doing that? I say, because you've been paying a dialect coach for weeks. And he says, quit doing that. We hired you to do what you did in the audition. So that was our first day. Later, same day, we shoot the scene where I retrieve the Blades of Chaos. A powerful, intensely dramatic moment in the game. Hell of a scene to shoot the first day, don't you think? Corey's direction to me was 3 words. Let it fly. I love that guy. That was Christopher Judge, mocap and voice of Kratos. And here it shows Christopher Judge and Sonny Suljic both fully decked out in motion capture rigs, posed with portraits of their respective avatars, Kratos and Atreus. Inside look, hearing voices. We wrote about casting monologues for Freya and Mimir and Brock, just to define each voice and get a sense of character. So when the actors came into audition, we had these things prepared. Well, the moment Danielle Basutti left after her Freya reading, we looked around at each other and it was like, her, right? Her, she's the one. Same with Alistair for Mimir and Robert as Brock. My God, his physicality was insane. It was just eerie how perfect they were. For the early writing, these casting monologues turned out to be valuable tools. We had them video recorded, so those files sat on my desktop, one for every actor. When I'd write early scenes, before I was familiar with the cast, I would play those monologues over and over again to get into their rhythms and hear the voices in my head. It was nice that we could cast them as early as we did and have them inform the characters. Richard Gaubert, Story and Narrative Design. Chris Judge quickly became the fulcrum figure in the set for cast and crew. Basutti compares Judge's presence to a gravity well. He pulls everyone together, just draws you into this huge warm group embrace, a safe space. Richard Schiff, the Emmy-winning actor who plays Odin in God of War, Ragnarok, much more on that in part 2 of this book, refers to Judge as the chairman of the board. There was a lot of love on that set, says Schiff, and it was Christopher who set that tone. Barlog marveled at Judge's willingness to be vulnerable and dig deep into his own life to find emotional honesty for Kratos. With each one of our principal actors, we knew from the first moments they were not just good, but perfect, says Barlog. The chemistry read between Chris and Sonny gave us chills, and Danielle completely blew us away. I knew we had our Freya within 30 seconds. Same with Robert as Brock. Man, Adam broke into this amazing improv for some Sony execs visiting during his audition. It was Sindri. Then Alistair came in speaking lines in like 4 languages. Smartest man alive, right? It was just uncanny, like a series of lightning bolts hitting us. The Freya audition. First off, the guys, Corey, Matt, and Richard, were rattled when I walked in because I looked exactly like their concept sketches of Freya. Corey says he was freaked out and thought, man, I hope she can act. So they gave me this Freya soliloquy, a fallen queen, shell of who she once was, everything stripped from her, appealing to her people for forgiveness, pain and bitterness and grief, so beautifully written, and it just came pouring out of me. I was Freya, yeah, I could see it in their eyes. Danielle Basutti, mocap and voice of Freya. Found Family Part 1. Starting at such a young age, just 8 years old, and spending the next decade immersed in God of War, it became more than just work, it became my life. The entire cast and crew, especially Chris Judge and Danielle Basutti, became like a second family to me. The scenes we filmed often felt incredibly real, and I believe that's why players can sense a certain authenticity in the game. I also owe so much of my portrayal of Atreus to Matt Sophos and Richard Gobert, the narrative directors on the projects. They truly helped me develop a stronger sense of the character, which helped incredibly, giving me calls, doing extra rehearsals, and familiarizing me about most of the stories and mythologies around the game. Once again, I just want to thank Chris for his support and suggestions. His guidance was invaluable, always present, always genuine. Chris had this incredible ability to be both blunt and deeply caring, and he helped me find a clear direction for my character, especially when I was confused about certain scenes. Some of our moments together on set transcended acting. They felt like real-life experiences, which is one thing I will never forget. Sonny Suljic, mocap and voice of Atreus. Here it shows a picture of Bear McCreary, right here, Corey Barlock, Sonny Suljic, Christopher Judge, in the lobby of the Playa Vista campus during the launch week of God of War in 2018. Every cast member interviewed for this book also described Danielle Basuti's performance as Freya as key to the emotional infrastructure of the story. Danielle just brings it every day, every scene, every line, says Chris Judge. I mean, she goes right where she needs to go. It's so inspiring. And she helped all of us get centered in the place we needed to be in order to make a scene authentic and real. Such a great, great stage partner. One of the best actors I've ever worked with. Alistair Duncan agrees, saying, yeah, Danielle commits to everything in the most absolute way. She's a great actor, always so present. Like she's there, and then she just goes for it. Really made us all better actors bouncing off that brilliant presence. This may sound like I'm speaking cheesy Hollywood speak, adds Matt Sophos. But I feel genuinely honored that these people gave so much of themselves for these roles. The writers Sophos and Gobert both marveled at how the cast kept adding dimensions of depth and nuance in ways they hadn't even envisioned. I love it when an actor brings shade to a line we didn't know was there, says Gobert. Inside look, the Kratos subroutine. Writing Kratos has been a great lesson. It made me a better writer because I had to be succinct. He's a Spartan, right? He's Spartan in all ways, no excess, including the way he talks. Cuts right to the chase. That aesthetic ends up applying across the board. Even writing, say Mimir, very talkative, a lot to say. But now I've always got that Kratos subroutine running in my head. Can this be said in 3 sentences instead of 5? In a related vein, Rich and I have this general belief that every supporting or secondary character in our story should essentially be a clone of a main character, showing either a road not taken, a cautionary tale, or an exemplar, something to aspire to. For example, Brock's no-nonsense persona is a crosser version of Kratos. For example, Brock's no-nonsense persona is a crasser version of Kratos. That way, everything supports your central story themes. Later, if you trim things to streamline plot, whatever remains still drives you straight down the road of your main themes. Matt Sophos, story and narrative design lead. Inside look, the Huldra brothers, sibling anti-chemistry. When I auditioned for Brock, I used this hokey Eastern Bloc accent in my first pass. It wasn't working, so I tried using a poor imitation of a Klondike gold miner. Deep, gruff voice, swears every other word. Funny thing is, the guy's got a lot smarter than he seems. The guy's a lot smarter than he seems, at first. And that's Brock too, right? Brock sees through the BS. He cuts to the chase. Anyway, they loved my bad impression, and it became Brock's voice. As for how I saw the sibling rivalry with Sindri, well, true story, my father and his brother got into an argument that lasted for 30 years. The whole time they lived nearby, crossed paths all the time, but they never spoke a word to each other, until a family funeral brought them back together after 3 decades. That's how I see Brock and Sindri. Years of stubborn pride, then something happens that breaks the ice. Faye's death and that special axe they'd made for her. Leviathan. They both loved her, and it brings them back together. Robert Craighead, mocap and voice of Brock. I love working with Robert, such a funny, gregarious guy with a huge heart. My take on our Halder brothers, I saw us as a Shakespearean-style comic relief, playing the fools, but very knowing behind the lens of that comedy. Together we have all the qualities that would make up one complete human. Brock gets all the cool qualities that everybody wants. Brash, fearless, tells it like it is. And Sindri has all the qualities you don't want anyone to see. Needy, hyper-emotional, nervous, the germaphobe, always scared of stuff. I think it made them a lot more attached than either one could fully admit, until sadly it was too late. Adam J. Harrington, mocap and voice of Sindri. Chris and Sonny. Chris is such a truly imposing guy, such heft and presence, not just physicality, but also that embracing personality. He really is a force of nature, just like Kratos. But what I found so fascinating was how Sonny, as Atreus, was never intimidated. Right from day one, he trusted Chris. Chris would tease him, and Sonny gave it right back. 9, 10 years old, and he saw right through to the gentle heart inside the big man. Their chemistry was amazing from the start, and it just kept growing over the years. Really wonderful thing to see. Alistair Duncan, head and voice of Mimir. Both pointed to Alistair Duncan as kind of a storyteller savant who could spin any piece of script into an epic, poignant tale. If we had some piece of lore we really needed to deliver, Alistair would just crush it in the booths as Sophos. His Mimir was our magic bullet. Duncan acknowledges the voice of truth weight he carried his Mimir, considering it both a compliment and a motivation to deliver lines with absolute authenticity. I love Mimir so much, he says with a grin. He's so real. He's got that Scottish integrity. When he speaks, you believe him, right? Look, I admit, I bring the ability to sell a line. I know I nailed a scene when I'd hear myself and think, wow, even I believe me. Barlog and his writers were also gratified to see one of their central narrative themes, the idea of found family, playing itself out in real life on the volume set. Chris and Danielle, they fostered a special feeling on that set every day, says Duncan. And it was more than just actors' camaraderie. It really was family. We all grew to care about each other genuinely. Chris Judge points out that the feeling extended to the studio crew too. Such an amazing culture, he says, at every level. Camera, sound, setup, stunt. It didn't matter. Everyone knows everyone's name. Everyone knows everyone's kids' names. Witchy woman. I'm very studious. I'm a copious note-taker. Part of the reason is I'm anchoring down the energy in thought and knowledge. There's something sort of witchy about it. Seriously, I've worked with people who say there's this witchy voodoo thing that happens when you actually put pen to paper. Sort of a lost art form these days. It triggers the brain, the neural pathways, and it's just kind of magical. Danielle Basutti, who played Freya, on her legendary character research and prep work. Note, it should be mentioned that Basutti wore an oversized sweater with Good Witch emblazoned on the front for our video interview. Inside look. Woo. I love a loud set. I did a movie once that had a lot of huge stunts, and every day, me and the stunt coordinator, Tom, we'd walk on the set and go, whoa. What a great way to invigorate the day, right? I love that. So for God of War, I do that every day on the volume. First thing when I walked in, newbies, it would kind of shock them. And then I'd go up to everyone and say, hey, let's be great today, why not? And that's how we'd start every day. All my background was in TV and film, so it took a while to adjust to those crazy motion capture rhythms. But Corey and the crew let us adjust. Let us find our own way through. Yeah, there's a camera wrapped around your head, hung right in your face. That's one thing. But these mocap scenes, man, they're long takes. You've got to be fully invested, ready to go. Emotional scenes, digging deep, inhabiting that space for long stretches. It's draining, man. But I always felt 100% supported on that set. All of us did. Christopher Judge played Kratos on the motion capture set. inside look conducting Kratos. Honestly, I get more overwhelmed talking about that E3 2016 presentation than most things. Still one of the most unforgettable moments of my entire life. One I'll take with me to the grave. It wasn't the first time I conducted my own music in front of a great audience, nor the last, but the fact that people didn't know what it was at first. I mean, it was 4 minutes long, not a brief little fanfare, a symphonic work that demanded your attention. Sure, there were lots of reasons to be nervous, but the closer to the event we got, the better I felt. I mean, the rehearsals were great, the teams were great, the musicians were great. I've never felt as prepared for a show as I was for that one. Ultimately, we were there to support Corey in the studio, and I just felt like the music part would go off without a hitch. So the curtain rises, and after a few teaser moments with Atreus, you see our guy emerge from the shadows, and the crowd just completely erupts. It was a moment when art comes together and melts cynicism. I'm getting chills right now again. Pure euphoria in that theater, incredibly validating and moving and unforgettable. I knew Corey was up there with the controller in his hand, living out every gamer's musical fantasy, playing a great game, while a conductor leads a full symphony orchestra, along with their movements in real time, before a cheering crowd. I know he was nervous, but man, he'll never get another gameplay experience like that again. Nobody will. Bear McCreary on the 2016 E3 PlayStation reveal on God of War. Found Family Part 2. Robert and Adam as Brock and Sindri were like my hilarious uncles. Alistair as Mimir too. He told a lot of great stories. I could listen to them all day. Danielle called herself my stage mom, and it really was like having a second mother. So now I had two great moms. We do a scene where Freya's mad at Atreus, yelling at me, and after the cut, Danielle would rush over and apologize. She felt so bad and make sure I was okay. I just love her. She still checks in on me, like Chris does. Sonny Suljic on his God of War family. A legendary reveal. In conducting more than 60 interviews to solicit inside perspectives on the God of War franchise history, we ended each session with a request for favorite anecdotes, the kind of stories that stick in the memory, that you never forget. For our Norse era book, every Santa Monica studio participant, literally every single one, mentioned a particular moment that occurred on June 13th, 2016 at the historic Los Angeles Shrine Auditorium. The occasion was that year's Sony's PlayStation press conference for E3, an annual industry event. The show kicked off in grand fashion, with award-winning composer Bear McCreary conducting a full symphony orchestra in a rousing overture. What the audience didn't know, this orchestral piece introduced key musical themes from McCreary's God of War score, at that time still a work in progress. Nor did anybody in the packed venue, capacity of 6,300, know that McCreary's piece was the prelude to a live preview of the game, which had not been formally announced yet, while nobody knew except a few SMS employees scattered throughout the theater, sitting incognito and nervous as hell. Studio leadership wanted the God of War reveal to be a secret, thinking it might be both fun and instructive to elicit a raw, honest reaction from the crowd. So we told our people, don't wear or say or do anything that indicates you're with the studio. Shannon Studstill, head of the studio. I'm still pretty amazed that we managed to keep the whole thing under wraps. The unforgettable moment came after the 4-minute overture ended with a powerful crescendo. The theater went dark, and the proscenium curtain slowly rose. The words Sony Interactive Entertainment Presents appeared on the massive screen, and then a cinematic began with the sound of Sonny Suljic's voice of Atreus as he played with wooden animal figurines. Again, nobody in the audience, other than the SMS folk, knew what they were seeing. Atreus was an unknown entity. Everything, in fact, about the new God of War had been kept strictly confidential for almost 3 years. Only vague rumors had filtered out to the industry press. This was the very first time that the rest of the world would see evidence of the bold reinvention brewing in Santa Monica. What ensued would go down in industry lore as one of the greatest game reveals of all time. The popular hunger for the return of Kratos was well known in internet gaming communities, But it wasn't until Kratos stepped from the shadows into the light and growled, "I am hungry," a moment choreographed as a dramatic reveal, according to Bruno Velasquez, the animation director, that the full force of fan hunger manifested itself. The theater audience exploded with howling delight in a moment that, well, you should see it for yourself if you haven't already. It's almost indescribable. The live stream online response was equally memorable. "It was thrilling beyond belief and also terrifying, frankly," says writer Richard Gobbard, "because now we knew how deeply Kratos was missed, how high the expectations would be. Yes, we were inspired to get back to work. Now all we had to do was make the best game ever. No pressure, man." So here's Brer McCreary conducts a full orchestra during a recording session for the God of War score. Bear McCreary and Christopher Judge pose at a God of War Ragnarok press event, and then here Bear McCreary conducts a full live orchestra during a 2016 press event revealing God of War to the public. Inside look, we believed. The key was that everyone was willing to commit to Corey's vision and give it the breath of life, even when things got hard. We had disagreements, some petty, some pretty hot ones. Families can be like that. Nothing was given. Nobody could predict a game of the year, or any success at all for that matter. But in the end, we pulled together. Chemistry fosters creativity, right? We believed in our process, we believed in each other, and we really cared. Honestly, I never think about recognition or awards. I just think about the fans. We really are just fans of our fans. I wanted to make a game they loved. That's what gets me fired up. I think the whole studio feels the same way. I remember one of the first things we came up with in concept art was Frey's house in the woods, the big turtle, Charlie. We loved it, and we were always excited to see what the fans would think. We put our hearts into it for them. Deal Longfish concept art lead. Final push, release, and reaction. John Palarmchuk has a favorite memory of the God of War homestretch crunch in the early 2018. On a late night in March, a month before the game release, he was playing and polishing sections of Alfheim. He suddenly leaned over to a colleague, a fellow environment artist, and said, "Do you realize how good this is?" He was just grinning back at me, laughs Palarmchuk. He goes, "Yeah, this is nuts. We've been working so hard on this stuff for like half a decade, and yet we still totally love this game." It hit me then that it was because we were making the game we always wanted to make, all of us in that studio. As always, the home stretch also brought its challenges, because Sonny Suljic's voice had deepened as he aged over the 4-year development process. He had to re-record many of his earlier lines in the studio's VO voiceover booth. One night during a late VO session after a long day of shooting on the set, Suljic's appendix burst. "I had a stomachache all day, and they told me to try a glass of water. Maybe I'd feel better," he says. Then I got in the recording booth, and bam, off to the hospital. After his emergency appendectomy, Suljic couldn't return to the set for more than 2 months. Other delays kept everyone on edge, but after being pushed back on Sony's release schedule several times, God of War finally hit retail shelves on April 20th, 2018. Cory Barlog's webcam selfie video of his emotional reaction as he checks the first incoming critics' reviews of the game became a viral classic, with, as of this writing, well over 2.4 million views on YouTube. Needless to say, the assessments were very, very, very positive across the board, including a lofty 94 rating on Metacritic. Few games receive that kind of rarefied critical response in the moment. Fewer still withstand the test of time, the way this God of War has. Aside from sweeping most Game of the Year awards for 2018, the title continues to be ranked high on every serious list of the greatest video games of all time. Best of all, Santa Monica Studios garnered recognition for nearly every aspect of its game development process, racking up award nominations for game design, art direction, animation, score and music, audio design, artistic achievement in visual art, narrative and writing, performance, and game direction. The accolades were spread across every team. It was a definitive affirmation by the industry and its media observers of the studio's greatness. Now they just needed to finish the story. And that is where we will finish this video. I appreciate all of you watching for as little or as long as you do. When we come back with the Extreme Sleep series, we will tackle Part 2, God of War Ragnarok, November 9th, 2022. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you next time. Bye.